Do I click on got it?
Yep. Okay, welcome everybody again this month. We have Ron back with us, and he talked about the Civil War before, and now we're going back even further and talking about Territorial Guard Society of Indiana. And we would love everyone to post below where you're from, and if you have ancestors that were in the Territorial Guard. And we're just going to go ahead and jump into this. Ron's this is his second time with us, and so he knows what to do. And so we're going to go ahead and introduce yourself a little bit, Ron, and we'll go from there.
Well, I'm a retired teacher and been a genealogist for a long time. And I've in the Sons of the American Revolution and several other organizations like that. So I'm interested I know about lineage societies and stuff. So we're gonna jump right in here. I'll share my screen with you. And try to get this stuff out of the way here. How do I get this out of here? There we go. Okay, we're talking about genealogy research for the Territorial Guard Society. A lot of people don't know about that. It's not too old, but if you go into the IGS website and you will find some tabs to go to other pages, and one of the tabs is going to be the Territorial Guard Society of Indiana. When you open on that, this is what you see here is basically what it is. This is our second lineage society in IGS. We started several years before this during the Civil War. And it was very, very successful. A lot of people like it, continue tracing their ancestry back to a Civil War soldier. But not very long ago, we decided that, well, maybe we needed something a little bit more challenging, something that our more experienced researchers can really dig into. And so we come up with the idea that, well, if you want to join the Territorial Guard of Indiana, what you have to do is to trace a direct descendant to somebody who was in what is now Indiana on or before statehood day, which is December 11th, 1816. Okay. Now, when this page came up, we started getting emails and questions, and we were at meetings and people would talk about it and stuff. And the question down below here, you see that this is what we got a lot. Where do I find any kind of proof that goes way back like that? So that's what we're going to try to go through a little bit today. Just if you're thinking about a Territorial Guard, if you have a sketchy idea about them, if you just want to find out if somebody with your person's name or anything like that is in Indiana pre-statehood, this is what we're going to take a look at, some of the places you can find. Okay. What you'll find really that the area time frame before Indiana became a state is sort of divided into three general areas. There was a sort of a colonial period that covered part that what is now Indiana, the Indiana area, and then following that, we became part of the Northwest Territory that was established by Congress, and then finally, before the last thing before statehood, we were a territory. And that was our last step, you might say. So the colonial period was essentially when Europeans first started coming into what was actually a Native American territory. I mean, every Europeans thought, well, it's just empty. There's nobody living there. That's not quite true. And they had to make accommodations for the Native Americans. But the first Europeans were essentially French. And this, you can tell this in Indiana because there's a lot of place names, especially in the western part of the state, that are French or derived from the French language. So they were here first. It came about because France owned Canada, and they also owned Louisiana. Now, these are two places that are pretty far apart, but they're very conveniently, they're joined by some waterways, the Wabash River, the Ohio, Mississippi, and all that. So France started filling in this middle part. So if you have people living in this area during this period, there's a strong indication that they're probably going to be French in some ways. Now, there's a number of genealogy resources. You might think that's, there weren't that many French, and most of the people were Native American without writing or anything like that. But there are a considerable number of resources that you can use for this period. Some of them you see on the screen here. If you do a family search thing for, Indiana French or something like that, if you do a lot of search engines and under French Indiana, a lot of things turn up. And oddly enough, more than you might think in this particular area. If you go on, familiar with NUCMA, the National Union Catalog of Manuscript Collections, if you put in there, if searching Indiana, time frame, France, that kind of thing, you'll be amazed at what the things turn up. All kinds of things are clear across the country. I mean, NUCMA is a nationwide thing. And then just because it's not in Indiana doesn't mean that it doesn't pertain to Indiana. So if you haven't used NUCMA, I would recommend that you do it, not only for this, but for a lot of things in genealogy. You'll notice down below there where the yellow arrow is one thing that I think is underused in genealogy is the college and university papers, like theses and dissertations and things like that, especially in the local areas. This is a paper about Vincennes and Knox County from Ball State, right here in Indiana. So, you can possibly search on stuff like that at your local university and might turn up some very interesting things. Over on the right-hand side, of course, WorldCat. You should be familiar with WorldCat and using your standard search terms. You can turn up all kind of really good stuff. You'll notice some of these in here that I searched on are in French. Unless you don't speak French, you might try finding one that's been translated or something like that. But a lot of them pertain to French America. And they might be in Europe, they might be in Canada, in Quebec, something like that. But they do pertain to the Indiana area. So surprisingly, there's a good number of items that you can possibly use to trace your people in that area. The French colonial period ended with the French and Indian War and the British winning that. It was called the 7 Years' War, but over here the French and Indian War. It ended with the Treaty of Paris, 1763. And then we entered the British colonial period. I picked up something recently. If you could look down here in the bottom right-hand corner, if you're familiar with the Last of the Mohegans, that movie that came out not long ago, and the novel that it came from, several of the characters were sitting around talking, and one of the main characters, Hawkeye, said that he was going to spend the winter in Kentucky. Kentucky. Now, that is very obviously Kentucky, and which is right across the river from Indiana Territory. So if you have people in this particular area at this particular time frame, you should probably look very carefully at Kentucky ancestry, because a lot of Kentuckians came right across the river and settled along the Indiana border. Now, after the Treaty of Paris, the British colonial period of 13 colonies and all that stuff went on, and then we entered the Revolutionary War. It was also ended by the Treaty of Paris in 1783, and then this area became American. But during the British colonial period, there's increasingly strong settlement coming in from the East Coast, down the Ohio River, or up from Kentucky was part of Virginia, up from Virginia at that time. And this area really began to catch on as settlements and farms and all that kind of stuff. The major immigration groups, of course, were Germans, who were coming mainly from Pennsylvania down the river, and Ulster Scots, the Scotch Irish, who were coming from Virginia, the Appalachians, up into Kentucky and that kind of thing. In this area, I would recommend that you look real strongly at DAR and SAR resources. This whole period here has been extensively covered by people trying to find their Revolutionary War soldier or sailor. You don't want to reinvent the wheel. So early on, if you're in this time frame, you should probably go on either the DAR, SAR website and search for your guy or your people, your families, and things like that, because there's a real good chance that someone has already done some of your stuff for you, and you can take advantage of that and move right on. After the Revolutionary War, it took the U.S. time to get organized, and then after the Constitution was adopted, one of the first things that the new Congress did was pass the Northwest Ordinance in 1787. And this was our next period in this area as being organized, you might say. It wasn't organized very well, but it was kind of organized, a lot more than the colonial period was. So I would recommend that you read the Northwest Ordinance, because many of the things that are still in existence in this area go way back here to this ordinance in 1787. And if you're a researcher, I want you to pay attention to this area in red down here. This was the famous Article 6, in which the United States said strongly that neither slavery nor servitude will exist in the Northwest Territory. Now, if you read that, wow, it looks great. And we don't need a Civil War, do we? Chances are, though, you will find that this not exactly was upheld in actual practice. When people came up from the South, which was right across the river, for instance, and they brought slaves with them, those slaves were not free. And as long as people lived in Indiana, they were still slaves, So this particular article had to be hashed out much later, right? I found this interesting map over here of the Northwest Territory. It looks kind of strange, doesn't it? This map is what Thomas Jefferson thought we should do with the Northwest Territory. Jefferson, of course, was a nerd like a lot of us, and he made all these fancy Greek names and things like that. Aren't you glad that you don't have to put up with that? Ooh. Okay, let's talk about some things that we commonly use in genealogy. One of our standards, of course, is census records. In the Northwest Territory, they did take some censuses like the rest of the country, but things didn't work out too well. The first census, of course, we were barely going in the territory, so the Indiana area was not counted. In 1800, they did have a census, but it seems to have been misplaced. In 1801, they took another one, but it was just numbers. No people were identified or anything like that. The only census in this particular territorial period was in 1807, which you see over here on the right-hand side. The Historical Society printed it up in a book and in 1980. It's still available. The book has been, digitized, and it's searchable on Ancestry and among other things. The 1810 census, again, was lost, and 1850 was, again, numbers only. If you look down at the bottom there, we had, on the 1807, we had 3 counties, and in this whole area, there was only about 1,850 voters, But what you can see over there on the right-hand side, most of the state was Knox County, and the handwriting is generally pretty good. And so you can, there's a lot of names there, so you should check it out anyway. What we have is some substitutes. Things that involve a lot of names in the same period of time that you may be able to use since you don't have a census available. One of them is militia records. The United States started out with every county in 13 colonies having a militia. There wasn't much law and order. There weren't the sheriff. There weren't any state troopers or anything like that. There weren't very many soldiers, in a regular army or anything like that. Most of anything that was going to be enforced, peace and all that, is going to be with a county militia. So every able-bodied white male in the colonies, in the territories, had to be a member of the militia. And the only exception was that if you were had religious, qualms or something like that, you were charged a tax. And those tax lists a lot of them are available too. But over here on the right-hand side, you can see this is a militia list from 1790 in Vincennes. So, there's lots of good stuff like that in the militias. So check out the militias in your area, and it might be a great help. Another census substitute is voter lists. As you can imagine, Americans were violently in favor of voting. They vote on everything. We still do. I mean, every time you turn around, every group you belong to, they vote, they get the results of the votes, then they vote again, all that kind of stuff. This was very true in the early days. They didn't want any kings. They didn't want any nobility or anything like that. They wanted ordinary people to have a say-so. And that's where these election lists and voter lists, you can see Vincennes, the counties. This is Dearborn in the middle, and Clark County over here on the left-hand side. There's tons of names. Of course, they're white male names, but if you're hunting families, you can start there and work your way on. But don't overlook these voter lists, because sometimes they're the only thing you're going to find in a certain county with that much detail to it. And going back again to the Northwest Territory and the slavery issue, there were a lot of Southerners. Most of Indiana was down by the river, so there were a lot of Southerners down there, and they kept trying to get that slavery part of the Northwest Ordinance repealed. And so they kept petitioning Congress, and these petitions were gathered together by Jacob Hyatt Dunn, and you can see a sample of one over here on the right-hand side. This is an 1800 from Indiana. Now look at all those names there that you might not be able to find anywhere else, but you can kind of assume that maybe they are Southerners. I would think so. This is searchable, by the way, on ancestry.com. So this might give you another way of replacing non-existent census papers. By 1800, we entered a new phase of this particular area. Ohio became a state in 1803, and the rest of the Northwest Territory was designated Indiana Territory. So in this particular period here, 1800, 1816, just because somebody says in a book or something that they live in Indiana, that doesn't necessarily mean the present Indiana. So keep alert to that. But the major thing that happened during this Indiana Territory period was Indian removal. If you look at the map here, all of these treaties you see were negotiated basically at the point of a gun to local tribes all across the state. And probably Article 1 of all the treaties required the Native Americans to vacate the state. So that was something that was going on throughout the Indiana Territory period. And later, of course, you look up further up north there, goes up into the 1830s and 40s, same thing. But down along the river where all the people were, the Europeans were, all of these treaties down here had the Native Americans out of Indiana by, the militia or any regular troops and something like that. So that was a feature of life in those days. There were Indian agencies. You can see this one over on the right about this period. Notice 1809, 1815. A lot of this movement was covered in books like that or letters or stuff like that. So you can find things about what was happening here to make that happen. The other thing that's happened was we were chopping up the land. We had to create counties. If you'll notice over here on the left-hand side, most of Indiana during this time was Knox County. Just about the whole state was considered Knox County. So if you have somebody in this time frame and you have a document that says they lived in Knox County, don't think that they lived in this little red area down here, because they could be in Terre Haute, they could be in Nashville, Columbus, anything like that, because that was all Knox County. You can find a lot of stuff actually for Knox County that goes back into this time frame. Note this is from Family Search, and there's quite a list of things over on the left-hand side, different types, court records and business biography and all kinds of stuff. And when you open them up and take a look at them, a lot of them go back into this territorial period, 1790, 1806, that kind of thing. So if these are on Family Search, if they've been digitized now and they're on, you're available, or you can have to go to one of the libraries to check it out. There's a number of things that cover the whole state, but they're just conveniently called Knox County. So we continued on as the time went on. The states, the territories started chopping up, and the various counties, they clustered along the river and along the Ohio state line. That's where all the people were, and that's how it filled in. And first they had a big county, and then they chopped the big county up in maybe a couple of smaller counties and that kind of thing. So got to pay attention to what the time frame is when you're doing research in these areas. One of the major things that happened in the territorial period was the War of 1812. This is something that you should definitely not overlook. War of 1812 was kind of the Indiana War. It started out with the Battle of Tippecanoe in 1811, even before the war broke out. And Hoosiers, Indiana residents were heavily involved in this War of 1812. There's lots and lots of material available. On fold 3, there are the War of 1812 pension files, which IGS had a significant role in creating. Over on the left-hand side, IUPUI has lots and lots of muster rolls and payrolls and things like that for the War of 1812 for the Indiana people. So that's available. It's pull them up, the IPS University Library, and there they are. You can see up on the top there, they're the name, lots of details about people, where they were born, what their ages are, that kind of thing, what their employee, what their work job is, and all kinds of stuff. So you can find lots and lots of good details in the War of 1812 material. Now, down at the bottom, same way as I talked before about the SAR and DAR, there are 2 lineage societies that are very prominent in the Daughters of 1812 and the General Society, which is the men's division department. There's a lot of people who have researched the War of 1812 to prove their ancestry. And those applications are on the websites of these 2 organizations, and they're searchable. So if you have a name that you think you need to check out, or several of them, you need to go. One of the first things you need to do is to go into one of these websites and do a search and see if anybody has already done your work for you. I would not be all surprised if somebody did, because that was just the way things do in the lineage world, okay? Local histories in this territorial period cover this area quite a bit, chapter 1, territorial period, that kind of thing. All of the counties in Indiana have at least one local, state history, county history, all kinds of histories. And so they're available very widely, digitally. A lot of them, there are hard copies in your local libraries and things like that. Down at the bottom right-hand side is a caution that I think you should remember. These kind of histories the publisher wanted to sell as many of them as they could, because they're in business, things like that. So what they did is they allowed wealthy people, especially, or prominent people, to pay for part of the writing that went into the history. So you'll never find much of a thing where saying so-and-so was a nasty SOB and everybody was glad when he died. You probably won't find that, because these are, a lot of them about puff pieces, they're called. So, have a little perspective on them, but they're good. They're good sources of material early on. And you should, if you're interested in a certain county, you definitely ought to go whatever, especially the earlier histories, and see what they had to say about perhaps your ancestor. There's a collection called the American State Papers. It was produced by Congress. They had the papers of like you say, the first 14 Congresses were published in the American State Papers. And there's volumes on various kind of things, land, bounty, settlers, land, all that kind of stuff. That's available on the Library of Congress. You can see the address down there, but just do Google Library of Congress, state papers, they come right up. They're very detailed. They're lots and lots of names and details about people. That page that you see over here on the right-hand side is from the Vincennes area, Knox County. Now look at all the names, all the French names especially, that are on this, about this, whatever was happening then. You'll notice down at the bottom in the little blue window, they actually identified some of the women, which was really hard to find in that particular tier. And over here on the right-hand side, in the other little blue circle, it tells about places they went, who they were, and you know, give you some clues about, well, okay, they left and went into Illinois. So then there's your next clue. Okay, so these state papers are filled with this kind of stuff all over the territorial parts of the United States, especially. There's a specialized group of papers called the Territorial papers. These were also created by the government, and they were specific to the various territories before they became a state. Volumes 7 and 8, you'll notice there, deals with Indiana Territory in this particular time frame, and there's lots of good stuff in this same way. Some of it is just statistical, like this census here is the 1801 census. You'll notice there's no names or anything like that, but it tells you how many people were where and what the towns were and that kind of stuff. So, you know, this particular one might not be too useful for you, but there's a lot of other stuff in here. But you'll find these volumes, you know, in libraries that they've been digitized and all kinds of stuff like that. Some examples of the territorial papers, there are petitions like this one from Harrison County in 1809. All those names, you may not find many of them in other places. And what's nice about the index is indexed by name. And you can see it tells some of these people are in lots and lots of petitions and memorials and all kind of papers, letters, things like that. So if you're lucky, your guys are going to be in one of those, or at least more than one. Now they're available on Hathi Trust. We'll talk about that a little bit, and on Family Search. So, you know, you don't have to chase around in libraries. You can do it with your buddy, Mr. Google. Land records, mostly down along the river. You notice over here on the left-hand side, the map shows what Knox County looked like in 1809. Most of the county, you know, most of the organization is down below the state, and the part up the top there where there's no roads or anything, or that's still to be discovered. Okay, but don't let the names just, you know, change what you think about stuff. Notice down here at the bottom, it says Ohio Township, Knox County. Now that's a long way from Vincennes and Knox counties today. So if there's an Ohio Township in Knox County, that's not the same. Okay, most of the land early on, meets and bounds, you should be familiar with that. The land down mostly in the southern part of the state was sold by 3 different districts. You'll see it. Cincinnati district was over along the state of Ohio, as you can imagine. Jeffersonville was the next one down along the river, and the furthest west along all the river and the Wabash was the Vincennes district. So all the land that you see in those areas were in these books right here. These are available at most libraries. They've been reprinted. Some of them have been digitized. So if you're interested in land records, you can check these out to state library, Allen County Library, what have you, and see exactly where your folks might have been. As far as religion is concerned, it's a little bit sparse in a lot of areas, of course. There were, of course, lots of churches in these, the early in southern Indiana area, territorial area, but the survival of records is kind of bleak. There's a book. This is book Religion in Indiana, produced by the Indiana University Press. You can find it in most larger libraries, or you might find it on interlibrary loan or something like that. But if you're lucky, maybe your church would be part of this. These are by counties and things like that. So you might be able to find something. Good luck. There are, of course, a lot of territorial books. Evergreen over here is a state library search engine. There's lots of things there. The Allen County Library has lots of books on territorial period, and more happening all the time. You should be familiar with that. One of the things that people tend to think about, forget about, is that in the early part of the United States, the whole country, not necessarily in just Indiana, about the only contact that most citizens had with the federal government was the post office. And the first thing that happened when a new bunch of people went to a new territory and they set up a town, the first thing they did was petition Washington, D.C. to set up a post office. And they had to appoint a postmaster. So if you're a little place, you might have actually a postmaster as one of your ancestors. Now, how do you find that? Well, one of the things you might try is the National Personnel Records Center in St. Louis. We customarily think of them as military records, right? But they're also the repository of civilian records. For instance, if you had anybody in the WPA during the Depression, they have personnel records in St. Louis, But in this territorial period, you can notice this post office page over here that goes back into the 1780s, just about, the Constitution was barely dry when they started doing post office records and things like that out in the territories and out in the other states. So this is something you might keep in mind, because in some little towns, there were a limited number of people that were really qualified to be postmasters. You should always never forget that major digitizing programs are going on all the time. I mean, you can't keep up with it. You just have to keep searching. If you search for something, 6 months ago, search for it again. And chances are you get entirely different results. But Internet Archive, HathiTrust, every major college, university, big library, little library, genealogy society, everybody's digitizing everything. So you need to keep searching and searching. Try to be as specific as you can about what you want. Otherwise, you might be buried under stuff. But you got to keep searching. A couple of things, a couple of books. Indiana, the Historical Bureau produced this little booklet, well, kind of a book in 1971 about the Indiana colonial period. It's a lot of good information, a lot of people mentioned, a lot of stories and all that kind of stuff. It's available in most libraries in Indiana. And one that's not exactly common is the Executive Journal. It was produced by the Historical Society a long time ago, 1900. It's been digitized all over the place. And there again, lots of names, lots of people, lots of details of stuff. Notice down at the bottom on the page, Jonathan McCarty, born in Tennessee, August 3rd, 1795. And there's a sketch, a historical sketch. So maybe if you're lucky, that's one of your guys. So now we've researched and we've discovered all of your documents. You have them in a nice, convenient pile at your house. Now you need to go back on the IGS website, open up the application, print it out, get all the details there, fill it out, add copies of the documents, and mail it in before December 31st. Now, isn't that a piece of cake? Aren't you glad you attended this session? Okay. So these were the people that created the state of Indiana in December 1816. Hopefully, your folks were part of all that. So that's the end of my little spiel. And I guess we're open for questions.
That was fantastic, Ron. A lot of information, especially resources. Okay,
Okay, I'll stop the share. There we go. Okay. So do we have any questions or anything like that that we could do?
Let's see. I don't see any yet. So guys, go ahead and post if you have anything.
Say what?
I don't see any yet. Kay, do you have any questions that you can think of?
I can't think of any questions, but the resources that Ron provided were excellent.
Yeah, amazing.
Uh-huh.
Now, they do have to be a member of IGS to qualify for the society, correct?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Civil War Society too. They are lineage societies for members. Just you can join at the same time as you send in your application, though, if you're not a member now.
Judy Jones says, thanks, Ron. Lots of great information, resources.
Yeah, if you're you send in your application before December 31st, we'll evaluate it. And if you're approved, you'll be notified. And then you will be inducted into the Territorial Guard Society during the business meeting next April 2024. That's the way this particular part runs right now.
Okay, we have a couple questions coming in now. Could you comment on ways to prove descendants for the earlier ancestors?
What do you mean, descent? Well, okay. In the Northwest Territory, there were a lot of marriages. There were death records. A lot of the communities that were in that area have records that survived of one kind or another. So, they might not all exactly say, well, John Jones is the son of Mary Jones and Mr. So, that kind of thing. But you can put together something on a preponderance of evidence thing, which you often have to do this far back in American history. But you can put together a pretty convincing package with a lot of things like that. Yeah.
Okay, and then we have John here. How rigorous is the application process? I can prove my relationship from one generation before 1850. Will names mentioned in will records, but not much else? So it sounds like he's probably got to dig deeper for more information.
Well, there's a couple of things. One of them is that we do accept proven record copies of DAR and SAR applications. So if you've done something, to get into the DAR, and it takes you back pretty far, you don't have to reprove all of that stuff. You just have to prove any connections that are missing that are specific to the Territorial Guard area.
Yeah, because someone may have already done all that research for you.
Yeah. The Indiana pioneers don't normally go back that far. And at this area, it's 1840 mostly. But there again, it gets you back to 1840.
Right.
You can just take it from there and go on. Plus, a lot of the applications, like the pioneers, they will go several generations further back, just because the applicants want them to do it, you know? So chances are that some of this has already been proven for other purposes, and we can adapt it for the Territorial Guard.
Okay, next we have Diana. What resource should I look into to find who the earlier commissioners of Indiana Territory were?
Say that again? Who?
What resource should I look into to find the early commissioners of Indiana Territory?
Okay, the commissioners on the territory were appointed by Congress. You know, they were federal, like William Henry Harrison, that kind of thing. So those records would be state archives records. I mean, in federal archive records. These were federal jobs. Territory was a federal organization, and it did not become a state organization until it was granted statehood.
Okay. We have Donna Adams saying early probation records are helpful. Let's see. We have Phil, he writes, for the Territorial Guards, would an ancestor that visited Indiana before 1860 and then came back with family in 1818 qualify?
No. We had a lot of visitors, okay, War of 1812, for instance. We had all kinds of people going through the state. The state was a crossroads even then. So people were moving from Ohio to Illinois and further west, that kind of thing. So you had to be a resident of some kind. You had to own land, you had to be a taxpayer, a voter, something to show that you were a resident of the territory of Indiana.
Okay, it looks like that's it. We've covered all the questions.
Now this is going to be recorded and on what? Facebook?
Yep, it will be on Facebook and on YouTube.
YouTube. Okay.
Yeah.
So
I have
anybody?
one more question that just popped up here.
Yes.
If I have an approved SIP ancestor that qualifies for a Territorial Guard, can I just make a copy of those papers and send those in? Or do I need to fill out a whole nother set of papers specifically for Territorial Guards?
The only proof you need for the Territorial Guard part is the approved application. Okay. You do need to fill out as Territorial Guard lineage thing, so basically just to show who's related to who and what the names are and that kind of thing, so that other people can use it. These applications and the documents go into a research file at the Allen County Public Library. So, you know, we want it to be clear who's related to who and the lineage and stuff. But as far as the proof is concerned, you can use an SAR or DAR or, you know, 1812 approved application as the proof of the parts that are pertinent to that.
Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm typing in your email address right now. So you might get a bunch of email questions.
Okay, that's fine.
Let's see. And if no one else has any questions, I think that's about it. And like I said, this will be on Facebook, and then we'll also be putting this on our YouTube channel, and we'll send a link to our YouTube channel on our Facebook. And so anyone can rewatch it as many times as you want. Like we said, Ron gave us tons of resources. So I know I'm going to have to go back and re-listen to it and write some more down. So, but thank you very much, Ron.
Okay.
And Kay, did you have anything else to add?
I can't think of anything. Just big gratitude for all those resources.
Yeah, this was fantastic.
Okay, see you guys later.
All right, see you later.
Bye-bye.
Bye.